Hello everyone, and welcome to a video that I'm calling Clay 101. Today we're going to talk about the stages of clay, how to properly store or save your clay, and then just a couple other things that you need to know. So first off, if you haven't already, on the art cart outside the front door of the school, I have little 3-pound bags of clay. Get one of those, or if you've got your own form of clay, use that. But we are starting with our clay. And so I want to talk first about the stages of clay, because there is very distinct stages as we look at clay and as we work with clay. So the first stage of clay is what we call slip, S-L-I-P, and this is clay that is like extremely like watery, it's goopy, it's really like, if you're thinking like really, really wet mud, slip is essentially that. So with slip, we have a really high water content. And so think of slip being like that almost watery form of clay. After slip, as we look at our second stage, this is what we call our plastic stage. Now, plastic clay just means that it is able to be molded, it's able to be shaped and formed. The clay that you picked up in that little bag, or the clay that I just freshly give you, is clay in that plastic stage. So this block of clay is that plastic stage of clay. So we go from slip, which is super, super watery, to are able to like hold its form. I can make marks in it, and those marks stay. And so that's our plastic stage for clay. After this, we have a stage called leather hard. And leather hard clay is clay that is less moisture in it than the plastic stage. You're not going to really be able to work it as smoothly or as easily as the plastic clay, but it still is workable. So as we talk about one of our projects later, our slab project, we're going to be able to talk about and work with slabs that are at that leather hard stage. We can still join them together, but they're not as like malleable or shapeable as clay in that plastic stage. So stage number 3 is our leather hard stage. Stage number 4 is bone dry. Now, as you can imagine, with bone dry clay, that clay is clay that the moisture has all left, and so this student work is a stage or a bone dry piece of clay. You can tell also the color difference from plastic to bone dry. As you're working with your clay, you'll be able to see that the color changes, the temperature changes. The plastic clay is generally very cool because the water content is leaving the clay into the atmosphere. And so once we move from our plastic clay to our leather hard to our bone dry, we're then looking at the water content of that clay dropping down and the water content becoming less as we get close to this. So, slip, plastic, leather hard, not an example here, and then bone dry. So these are the first 4 stages. And one thing that I love about clay is it can be endlessly recycled between these 4 stages based off how much water we have in it. So if we get to the point that we've got a bone dry piece that we don't necessarily like, we can drop it in water and we can turn it back into slip fairly easily by just increasing the water content there. Now, some of you know about the process of transforming clay, but some of you, this is our first time playing with clay. And so after these 4 stages, we have a big kind of oven-shaped or oven-like device called the kiln. Now the kiln is a really cool, it's like an oven. There's little like peepholes on it over here. There's a little box on it that tells me how hot it is and then I can control the whole thing with little dials and everything. And then there's a big lid that closes down on it. And so the kiln, and I'll write the labeling here, kiln is K-I-L-N. The kiln is like the furnace that heats up our clay. So as we talked in these 4 stages, we're looking at clay differences being all about how much water is in it. As we look at being done, once our piece is in that bone dry stage, we can then load it into the kiln. And the kiln process is called firing. F-I-R-I-N-G. Now, firing just means heating up the clay to create a chemical change to it. So what happens is in this process, we've got our water leaving the clay to the point that all the water that the atmosphere can suck out is gone. Like this is dry, it is bone dry. What happens is as we load that into the kiln's going to heat up to a little over 2,000 degrees. In that time, the clay is going to undergo a chemical change, and it's going to leave this stage behind, and it's going to come out something like this. So this is the same type of clay as this. The difference is the water content, the stage of the clay. This is our clay that has been fired. And so we have our clay in this stage. This is our 5th stage when it comes out. And this is called bisqueware. Now, one way I like to think about this is I love food, and biscuits are a delicious type of food. And so how many times do you bake biscuits? 1. So you only get 1 bake for biscuits. You pull them out of the oven, you eat them, they're delicious. So bisqueware is clay or a ceramic piece that has only been fired once. Now, one of the things that's fun about clay is we have a material that we can put on it called glaze. And so if we take bisqueware and we glaze it, and then we load it back into the kiln, when it comes out of the kiln again at stage number 6, this is what we call glazeware or earthenware, depending on what type of clay we're working with. So glazeware or earthenware. And glazeware is going to be shiny. It's when we get that nice colored sheen to our pieces. And so all of the pieces that you guys are probably familiar seeing are oftentimes pieces that have been fired twice and are glazed. So those are some basics about the stages of clay, how we can work with it there. I do want to talk real quickly in this video about how to store clay, because I gave you 1 3-pound block of clay. If your clay starts getting too dry, remember that we can always pull it back towards that plastic stage, towards that leather hard stage, even if we want to go all the way towards that slip stage by how much water we have to it. So if we add too much water, we might start veering more towards like clay that is slippy, that's not going to hold its shape, that's not going to hold together. If we don't have enough water, we might be moving towards the leather hard or the bone dry clay that is hard to work with. If it's crumbling as you handle it, then you probably are going to need to add more water to it, but add just little bits at a time. So over on this side, I've had how to take care of your clay. First things, you're going to want to make sure that you store your clay in a sealed plastic bag. And so when you collected clay for me, you found it in a Kroger bag that had no holes in it, and it was twisted up, and the clay was placed on top of the opening, so that way it was sealed inside. If you have Ziploc bags, big Ziploc bags, this can work well for storing your clay, but you need to store it in a sealed bag. If your clay is starting to get towards the dry side, what I'd recommend is getting a damp paper towel. And so you can do this by taking some paper towel, by dipping it in like a cup of water or running it under the sink, and then squeeze any of the extra water out of it. So that way it has got a little bit of moisture to it, but is not super wet. Wrap that clay up in that damp paper towel, and then put that back in your bag. And so storing our clay, we always want to make sure that we have it stored in a plastic bag. If I am working on a project, what I'm oftentimes going to do is I'm going to have a bag of clay that is my unused clay, and I'm going to have a bag of clay that's my actual project. In your first couple days here, I want you to just kind of handle the clay. Check out our next video where we're going to talk about wedging the clay, which is a process that you'll probably hear other ceramicists or potters talk about. But we'll talk about wedging the clay as well as how we can go about joining two pieces of clay together. And then I'm going to teach you over the next couple days all of the hand building techniques that we would use to create ceramic pieces from face vessels like this all the way up to portrait busts made out of clay using kind of our face as a model. So tune in to our next video here, and happy making.